I thought my sister was my only sibling, but the twist? She was actually my half-sister, and our father had another family who he had been supporting in secret for decades. Thanksgiving. My favorite holiday. It's the one time of year everyone in my family comes together without the excuse of a wedding, funeral, or someone's big birthday. It's just us. Or, so I'd always thought. Samira, my sister, was hosting again this year at her house in Darien, Connecticut. She has the big house and the real dining room with an actual chandelier, so it just made sense. I always brought my mashed potatoes, a family favorite, especially with my little twist of extra butter and a dash of garlic powder. Rob, my husband, would be making his garlic rosemary Brussels sprouts. The man loves a good side dish, and I swear it's the only thing he actually enjoys cooking. Samira greeted us at the door, looking every bit the Pinterest-perfect hostess she was known to be. Her hair in soft waves, her smile wide, the aroma of turkey and cranberries filling the house. Lena. Rob. She squealed, pulling me into a tight hug. I swear, if your mashed potatoes are as good as they were last year, I'm going to need the recipe. Mom says you have a secret ingredient? I laughed, giving her a knowing wink. You know I can't give up the goods, Sam. If I did, you'd have no reason to invite me. Samira laughed, but there was a flicker of something behind her eyes, a glimmer of tension that I couldn't quite place. But she shook it off quickly, and her husband Kyle soon appeared, giving Rob a hearty slap on the back as he led us to the living room where drinks were already in full swing. About 20 minutes later, my parents walked in. My mom, Rosa, wore the same faded green pendant she always wore to family functions. I used to think it was just an old family heirloom, some vintage thing Dad got her, but she clutched it like it held 100 secrets. Dad looked tired, Martin Grant, the stoic history professor with an opinion on everything. But today, he was quieter than usual, his eyes a bit distant as he hugged me, mumbling something about looking forward to the meal. He'd retired a year ago, and I thought the slower life was good for him, but I swear he looked older than he had just last Thanksgiving. Once everyone was gathered around the table, Samira and Kyle's kids, Julia and Max, wriggled in their seats, excitedly passing plates and trying to sneak bites when they thought no one was looking. Everything felt normal. Comfortably chaotic, as it always was at Thanksgiving. Kyle raised his wine glass. All right, let's do a quick prayer and give thanks for all this incredible food and the chance to be together. He looked around the table, nodding at each of us with his best attempt at sincerity, though it was clear he was just trying to get through the motions quickly so we could dig in. We all murmured our amens and started passing dishes around. For a while, the room was filled with the sounds of clinking cutlery and quiet laughter, the kids asking for more mashed potatoes, Samira telling Kyle to stop hogging the gravy, and me and Rob laughing over his failed attempt at making bread rolls last night. Then, just as everyone was starting to get into dessert, my mom put her fork down with a quiet clink and cleared her throat. I noticed her hand trembling as she reached up to touch her pendant, eyes shifting to my dad. He gave her a tight nod, and she took a deep breath, her voice barely above a whisper. Martin and I. We have something to tell you all. The room went dead silent. Even Julia and Max stopped mid-giggle, looking around as if they'd suddenly felt the shift in the air. Kyle raised his eyebrows, glancing at Samira with a "What's going on?" look. I felt a strange weight settle in my chest, an odd feeling like I was about to hear something I'd rather not. Mom took another deep breath, her gaze flicking between me and Samira. You have a brother. My fork clattered to my plate. I thought maybe I'd misheard her. The words hung in the air, heavy and unreal, like they didn't belong to my family, to this table. I glanced at Samira, who looked equally stunned, her eyes wide with confusion. Kyle was the first to speak. Wait, what do you mean, a brother? Dad cleared his throat, his voice low, barely a rumble. Your mother and I thought it was time you knew the truth. I had a son. Before I met your mother. The words hit me like a physical blow. I couldn't speak, I could barely breathe. All I could do was stare at my father, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what he'd just said. Samira found her voice first. A son? So, what, a half-brother? You're saying we have a half-brother? Dad nodded, his eyes cast downward, avoiding our gazes. Yes. His name is Jonah. He lives in Hartford. Jonah, I whispered, the name foreign and heavy on my tongue. I looked at my mom, who was staring at the table, her hands tightly clasped in front of her. You knew? I asked her, my voice barely a whisper, but I could feel the tremble in it. She nodded slowly. Yes. I've known. For a long time. For how long? Samira's voice was sharp, cutting through the tension like a knife. Mom's lips trembled. Since before you were born, Samira. That's when it hit me, 40 years. They'd kept this secret for over 40 years. All that time, we'd believed we were a small, tight-knit family, just the four of us. And now there was this stranger, this man named Jonah, who was apparently my father's son. Dad finally spoke, his voice rough. It wasn't something I could just abandon, you know? Jonah was my responsibility. I could feel my heart pounding, anger boiling up inside me. So while we were growing up, thinking we were this perfect little family, you were out there with this other family, with Jonah? He winced, shaking his head. Not a family, Lena. Just Jonah and his mother. I was there financially, helping out as I could, but I wasn't there. But you gave them money? Samira's voice was laced with disbelief. Dad nodded slowly, looking away, his face etched with guilt. Yes. I supported them. Financially. It was the least I could do. I could feel a wave of emotions rising up inside me, anger, betrayal, confusion. So all those times you said you couldn't come to our recitals or our graduations because you had work, you were with him? With Jonah? My father flinched, pain flashing across his face. No, Lena. I tried to be there as much as I could. But there were times when. Yes, I had to be with Jonah. I had to be there for him, too. It felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. The memories started flooding back, the missed dinners, the unexplained absences, the times when Mom would look worried but say nothing, brushing it off as just Dad being busy. Samira, always the calm, collected one, looked like she was barely holding it together. She turned to our mother, her voice icy. And you? You just went along with it? For 40 years? Mom's face crumpled, and she looked down, her hands trembling. It wasn't easy, Samira. But I loved your father. And he loved Jonah. I couldn't ask him to give up his own son. There was a long, terrible silence as we all absorbed that. Finally, Samira shook her head, her voice choked. And when were you planning to tell us? Were you just going to wait until one of you was on your deathbed? Dad's face twisted in anguish. We thought it would be easier when you were older. When you could understand. Understand? I couldn't keep the bitterness out of my voice. Understand that you lied to us our whole lives? That we have a brother we've never even met? Dad looked up, his eyes wet with unshed tears. I know we failed you. I thought I was doing the right thing. I didn't want to tear our family apart. Too late for that, Samira muttered under her breath, crossing her arms and looking away. Just then, there was a knock at the door. The knock at the door startled us, pulling everyone's attention toward the entryway. Samira glanced at Kyle, her expression a mix of shock and disbelief. It was Thanksgiving night. Who on earth would be knocking now? Samira moved toward the door, her face pale. When she opened it, there stood a man. He looked to be in his early 40s, tall and lean, with dark hair peppered with gray. His face was somber, eyes a piercing blue that seemed to take in every detail of the room the second he stepped inside. He was the spitting image of Dad. Hello, he said, his voice steady but soft. I'm Jonah. The room went silent, and I felt my heart drop. Here he was, the man we'd just learned about, standing in my sister's doorway like a ghost summoned by the weight of our family's secrets. Dad stood up, his face a mixture of shock and guilt. Jonah, he said, his voice breaking slightly. I didn't expect you. Tonight. Jonah looked around the room, his gaze lingering on each of us, taking in the tension, the rawness. He gave a small, sad smile. I figured it was about time I met the other side of the family. Samira shot Dad a glare that could have sliced steel. You invited him here? Dad shook his head quickly, glancing at Jonah. I didn't. Jonah, how did you know? Jonah's eyes flashed with a quiet anger. How did I know? Because you called me last week, asking me to meet with you here soon. I guess I was early. But apparently, I was right on time. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. I could feel my anger boiling over, but Samira was the first to speak. So you're telling me you called him and were going to introduce him to us without even warning us? Just spring it on us at Thanksgiving? She turned to Mom, her voice laced with disbelief. Did you know about this, too? Mom looked at her hands, refusing to meet our eyes. I knew he wanted to introduce Jonah. Someday. But I didn't think it would happen like this. I couldn't hold back anymore. I turned to Dad, my voice rising. You know what? This is beyond anything I could have imagined. You lied to us, you kept this secret, and now you're dragging us into your mess on a night that's supposed to be about family. A real family. Dad looked at me, his eyes wide with pain. Lena, I didn't want it to be like this. I was just trying to find the right time. The right time? 40 years, Dad. 40 years you kept this from us, and now, you bring him here like it's nothing? Jonah's face tightened. He took a step forward, looking directly at me and Samira. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I didn't mean to intrude. But I had to know you. I've spent my entire life wondering who you were, watching from the sidelines, knowing my father had another family, but not knowing anything about you. Samira crossed her arms, her expression hard. And what do you expect from us now? To welcome you with open arms, pretend that none of this matters? Jonah's face fell, and he nodded slowly. I don't expect anything. But maybe you deserve to know what I grew up with, too. Maybe it would help you understand. He paused, And when he spoke again, his voice was raw. I grew up watching my mom struggle, scraping by with the little support Dad could give us. And I'd hear these stories about the beautiful home he had with his real family, the trips he took with you, the life he had. I hated you all for a long time. I hated you because he was never really there for me the way he was for you. He looked directly at Dad, anger finally seeping into his voice. You might have given us money, Dad, but you gave them everything else. Dad sank into his chair, his face pale, unable to meet any of our eyes. Samira and I exchanged a look, our anger mixing with something unexpected, pity. Jonah had grown up knowing we existed, knowing Dad was out there with us while he and his mom scraped by. Suddenly, the image of our perfect family felt hollow, as if it had all been built on a lie. I cleared my throat, struggling to keep my composure. So, Jonah, I said, my voice steady but laced with bitterness, you grew up knowing about us, and you just... What? Stayed in the background? He nodded. I didn't have a choice. Dad told me it would complicate things if I tried to reach out. So I kept my distance. But it's not like I didn't see you. I know you two went to Yale because I saw you both at Dad's lectures. I watched you and Samira at your graduations. I even came to your wedding, Lena, from the back row. My heart clenched. I hadn't known this man for even an hour, and yet he'd been watching us, silently existing in the shadows of our lives. Samira shook her head, her voice shaking. So, what now? You're here, and we know. What are we supposed to do with this? Jonah's eyes softened, and he looked almost vulnerable. Honestly? I don't know. I don't even know why I came tonight, except I needed to see you. To know you. I felt like half of me was missing my entire life. And I thought maybe you'd want to know me too. The room went silent again, everyone's emotions raw, exposed. Then Samira spoke, her voice calm but cold. Dad, you've built this lie for 40 years. You've given him, what, scraps? Enough to keep him alive but not enough to make him part of our lives? She shook her head. Well, we're done letting you decide what our family looks like. Dad looked up, his face stricken. Samira, Lena, please. I was just trying to do what was right. No, I interrupted, my voice firm. You don't get to decide what's right anymore. I turned to Jonah, an idea forming in my mind, a way to put some power back in our hands. Jonah, you said you never had a choice. That Dad was always in control. Well, maybe we can change that. Jonah looked at me, his brow furrowing. What do you mean? I took a deep breath, feeling the pieces click into place. I think it's about time you got what you deserve. Not just a seat at this table tonight, but a seat in this family, in Dad's life. Samira caught on immediately. Yes. If Dad's so insistent that he wanted us to know, then let's make sure he lives with the consequences. I turned back to Dad, my voice laced with the vengeance I knew he deserved. From now on, we're making you a real part of this family. You'll be at every holiday, every event, and you'll get the chance to build the relationship Dad never gave you. Dad's face paled, and he looked genuinely frightened, as though he finally understood the weight of what he'd done. Jonah, though stunned, slowly nodded. I'd like that. With that, we began what would be the slow process of integrating Jonah into our lives. It was far from easy. Over the next year, he joined us for family events, and while it was awkward and tense, it became clear that he was as much our brother as we were sisters. He was quiet, introspective, but there was a kindness in him, a sense of resilience that slowly chipped away at our defenses. And Dad? He watched helplessly as we grew closer to Jonah, as the brother we'd never known became part of our family. In a strange twist, Dad had brought Jonah into our lives to keep him close, but instead, he had lost control. Now he had to live with a family he'd fractured, with a son he could no longer keep in the shadows, a son he could no longer control. And for the first time, Samira and I felt a sense of peace, knowing that Dad's deception had turned on him. He had tried to keep Jonah a secret, a burden he could manage from a distance. But now, with Jonah in our lives, we had taken control. And watching Dad realize the extent of his own undoing was a kind of justice neither of us had ever expected. In the end, it was Jonah who taught us that family was more than secrets, more than lies. It was the choice to face the truth and build something real, even if it took 40 years to get there.